Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Play Your Faves, the show where you tell me what characters you want to play in D&D, and I create the character sheets so you can just sit down and play your faves. Last episode went a little bit longer than I wanted it to, so this episode we're going to dive right into it and get to all the good stuff that you guys are here for. This week's episode is another character that's kind of unique from a lore perspective, is really interesting and cool, and to be honest, from a character gameplay perspective for D&D, I'm kind of proud of this one. I think it'll be a lot of fun to play. The character is Nightmare from the Soul Calibur series. Nightmare is the antagonist of quite a few of the Soul Calibur games. He's the embodiment of the evil blade Soul Edge, and is just a really cool character. In thinking about a character that's basically controlled by their weapon, I had a couple different options that I was thinking about, and I very quickly gravitated towards the idea of a Hexblade Warlock. So let's head over here. This is our character sheet, as you can see, Nightmare. And it's a level 6 Warlock. I didn't have to multi-class this one. The Hexblade abilities and Warlock abilities just really fit in well to get the gameplay I was looking for. The other thing is unique about this, I mentioned last time, there's going to be a lot of humans because they get those extra feats that let you really customize the character and playstyle. This isn't. I chose Dragonborn for two reasons. One, they get a bonus to Charisma, which is going to be very important for Warlocks, because that's their spellcasting. And if you've ever played, he has one arm that's kind of normal, and the other arm is this weird kind of claw corrupted thing. And I just felt that Dragonborn would look the most like what we were looking for. Also, I chose blue because he's known as the Azure Knight in the games, so blue Dragonborn kind of fit. For the background, I chose Outlander because if you look at his backstory during Soul Calibur 1 and now Soul Calibur 6, since it's a reboot, he spends a massive part of the first part of his life as Nightmare, just wandering the wilderness, killing people to feed Soul Edge. So I thought Outlander just fit really well for what the character was. And then alignment, the sword itself is evil, and in D&D, good and evil and lawful and chaotic are not quite what you generally tend to think. Lawful generally means you are a big believer in rules. You believe in the rule of law, or you believe in some sort of rule system, whereas chaos, you believe in personal freedom, you believe in breaking rules, doing things that don't fit into normal societal standards. And then good and evil is good is selfless, evil is selfish. Evil characters are not just people that go around, kicking puppies. They're people that are entirely motivated by their own needs. They don't care about other people. And Nightmare is that, only it's not really his needs, it's the sword's needs. And the sword really is the character. As much as Nightmare is his own person, he's entirely controlled by the sword. And he doesn't really fall into an idea of following the rules or breaking the rules. He will follow rules in certain times, and he'll break them in other times, simply because his only goal is to satisfy himself. So that's where the neutral evil comes from. Let's start with let's start with the ability scores. First things first. Again, all of these I use the standard array for them, so that's 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8. For this one, my 15 was actually the charisma, I believe, because that turned into a 16. 14 for dexterity, 13 for strength. They get a +1 to strength as a dragonborn, and then 12 constitution to give some hit points because he is a beefy guy. 10 to wisdom, 8 to intelligence because again he's generally a little bit more streetwise than book smart. And then for skills, intimidation was the big one that I had to do. Nightmare is a scary character, and he intimidates a lot of people to get what he wants. The other thing was athletics. He's a very, very strong character. He wields this massive two-handed sword in one hand a lot of the time and just swings it everywhere. So he needed intimidation and athletics, and I rounded out with survival from living in the wilderness, and investigation because he would search out people so that he could kill them to fuel his sword. Now to go to this stuff here. With him being a fighting game character, there wasn't a whole lot of really good quotes I could use here. So I just went with kind of a real basic because this is kind of his idea. The ends justify the means. And here, the trait, I rely much more on instinct and emotion than planning and reason. He is driven almost entirely by instinct of Soul Edge, the blade. And then his bond is he has to gather souls for Storage to resurrect his father. There's a whole backstory. I have it written a little bit later in the thing. But he killed his own father and then kind of deluded himself into thinking that someone else did it, and then formed a pact with Soul Edge because he was lied to by the blade to believe that if he fed it enough souls, it would resurrect his father. And then this Bass thing, Siegfried, the guy that became Nightmare at first, was a good person for the most part. He just made some bad decisions and got in with a bad crowd. And so this is just, he's done so many bad things, he's kind of numb to it now. So for things that really turn him into how you want to play Nightmare in a D&D setting. As a Dragonborn, he has this lightning breath thing. I've got no idea how to turn that into a Nightmare move from Soul Calibur. He just doesn't have a ranged attack like that, so we kind of just ignore it. When we go here, with him being a Hexblade, his patron is a weapon, and I mean, Soul Edge, he made a pact with it. It works perfectly. The invocations are all based on things to make his weapon more powerful. Improved pact weapon makes his weapon a +1 weapon and lets him use it as a focus for spells. Incredibly useful. It means that even with him using this great sword, he is able to still cast spells very effectively. Eldritch Smite actually turns him kind of into a warlock paladin. When he hits someone, he can actually expend a spell slot to do extra damage, and that is very much, if you've played Soul Calibur 6, they have these strikes that will actually break break the enemy's armor and stuff like that, and that to me is very much an Eldritch Smite kind of thing, where they just put a little extra power behind it and it does massive damage, enough to break armor pieces. And then Thirsting Blade simply gives him the ability to attack twice instead of once on his turn. Since a Warlock, just a standard one, would be casting spells and things like that, because he's using melee attacks, he needs that extra attack to get him in line with other melee classes. And again, as a fighting game character, he does a lot of attacks, so it makes sense. He also has two other things that I think kind of fit into the lore if they don't really translate to fighting game mechanics. You have Hexblade's Curse, which is where he just focuses on someone and can do extra damage to them. And in the game, you could maybe call that soul charge or something. But in the lore, he would find people and just laser sight to kill them so he could absorb their soul into Soul Edge. So Hexblade's Curse actually makes a lot of sense for that. And then Accursed Specter is this really unique ability where he can kill someone and then raise their soul to fight with him. Again, in the game, as far as the fighting mechanic, that doesn't happen because it's always one-on-one fights. However, later on in the lore, Siegfried actually breaks free of Soul Edge and becomes his own character, but Nightmare still exists because Soul Edge possesses the armor and eventually possesses two other creatures in order to continue living and continue absorbing souls. So the Cursed Specter actually fits into the lore really well, that it can possess basically a dead body to make it fight again. So I just thought that was really, really cool. These little circles you see here, it's something I do on my character sheet so that when I use it, I can just check it off instead of having to remember, did I use that today? Did I not? So it's just something I personally do. For weapons, Soul Edge is just a standard greatsword. And then the half-plate armor, he wears mostly full plate, but warlocks can't wear that without taking a feat for it. So half plate is a medium armor, which he can wear as a hexblade. They get access to medium armor, and it gives him a pretty decent AC of 17. So it's not too bad. It's a little bit difficult in the Adventurers League to get enough money for half plate, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. To kind of show you how you could raise this character up in the Adventure League and still play like Nightmare. And then the final thing we have, here's the history that I mentioned. It goes into a decent amount of detail in there. And then the spells. This is what's really going to give that extra edge and that extra kind of super-powered fighting game character feel to them. You have, for cantrips, you have True Strike, which allows you to basically use your turn to focus on someone. It gives you advantage on the next attack. This is very much like the big winding attacks that Nightmare has in the game. You have Thunderclap. If you look at his Soul Calibur 6 version, he actually has this explosion thing that he does that puts him into, I think it's called Nightmare mode. Where he kind of glows red and everything. But that initial explosion knocks people back and does damage. And that's kind of what Thunderclap does. And then Shocking Grasp here is 100%. He has the ability to grab people with that claw, and lightning is a big visual effect in Soul Calibur in general. So Shocking Grasp just made sense. That's a way for him to just use his claw to attack someone and grapple them. The rest of the spells that he have are all based on the idea of making Nightmare specifically Soul Edge more powerful. You have Wrathful Smite, which is a spell he gets access to being a Hexblade, which is literally your bonus action. You imbue the weapon with energy, and then you hit with it. And that's quite literally what he does in a lot of fighting games, especially Soul Calibur 6. You'll see him do these wind-ups where the blade starts glowing and boom, and do crazy amounts of damage. So that's Wrathful Smite. Hex is another thing that he can kind of mark a target, very similar to Hexblade's Curse, though not quite as powerful. And then Cause Fear, that's a Nightmare thing. He just scares the heck out of people. And for his level 2 spells, you have Branding Smite. Again, same thing, but it sets them, I think, on fire. And Mind Spike is he actually literally goes into their head and does psychic damage, which again, from the kind of possession aspect of Soul Edge, makes sense. He can infect people with this negative energy from Soul Edge. And the final ones, we have our Vampiric Touch, which basically just lets him keep making melee spell attacks, which you can flavor text as him hitting with his sword. And he gains hit points back from it, as if he's literally draining their souls into him. And then elemental weapon is just another thing that, ignites his sword with fire, freezes it with ice. Again, from a fighting game perspective, not 100% shown up in the game, but there are abilities in the game that imbue the weapon with special effects that you could say were lightning or fire, things like that. So that's basically it for the character. Now, like I said, all these characters are Adventure League legal, but you generally have to start an AL character at level 1. So to get Nightmare playing from the get-go the way you want him to, the first thing you want to do is start off as a level 1 Hexblade Warlock. Now, your packed weapon, you can't actually make a two-handed weapon as a Hexblade as your packed weapon. You have to, it cannot have the two-handed property. So I recommend start off with your packed weapon being a longsword, because it has the versatile property and it'll give you most of the same things. When you get to level 2, you won't be able to use most of the Eldritch invocations because they require Pact of the Blade. So really just pick the ones that you feel kind of fit, and then every level you can actually replace one of your old Eldritch invocations with a new one. So once you hit level 3, you can get Improved Pact Weapon, and then level 4 you can get Eldritch Smite, and then level 5 you can get Thirsting Blade, to have all those in there. And then as far as armor is concerned, like I said, the Adventure League is very difficult to get money, especially with their new rules. So getting half-plate armor could be really difficult. Two different ways around that. One, until you're able to get all of your Eldritch invocations for the blade, you could take the invocation that lets you cast mage armor for free, or just get some studded leather. That gives you an AC of 12, plus 2 will get you up to 14, and eventually upgrade that to something a little bit better. Maybe you can find a +1 studded leather or something like that. Those are all things you can use, and with a dexterity of 14, you're not going to be as bad off as you could be. But generally, you do want to try and aim for that half plate. The other thing you'll notice, I didn't take any feats. The feat that you get at 4th level, just use that to raise your charisma, because with Improved Pact Weapon, you don't actually use your strength or dex to attack with. You use your charisma, so you don't need those skills anymore. So just raise your charisma by 2, and then when you get another one at 8, probably do the same thing, unless you want to take the feat that gives you access to heavy armor so you can wear the big heavy stuff and not have to worry about a low AC anymore. So that's Nightmare. Again, if you guys really enjoy this, please feel free to share it around, give it a like, all that, YouTube stuff, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like the character sheet, you can actually head over to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/trainerjody. I'll have a link directly to the post for the character sheet in the description below, so you can actually download the entire character sheet and use it when you sit down at your next game, if that's the way you want to do it. Also, in the comments below, please let me know what other characters you want to see on Play Your Faves. And let me know if you have a different idea on how to make Nightmare in D&D. We had a great conversation last week where there was some conversations about different ways to create Kratos, and it was really interesting. And I'll try to respond with my own ideas and stuff like that, and have a nice little conversation. Anyway, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.